Hello buddy, I'm Dutch, and if you like hiking tips, fun adventures, and great gear, hit like and subscribe to join my vlog journey. And if you'd like to be notified when we upload a new video, click that bell as well. All right, let's go. Hello everybody, I'm Dutch, and today we're gonna take a deep dive into fabrics. Now, you may be saying, Dutch, I don't DIY, and that's okay, because there's a very good chance that right now you are wearing fabrics. So if not, go put some clothes on and let's learn about fabrics because they are in our lives, and it's good to know about the terminology, about how your gear is made and what really you're buying. What's the difference between deniers, head pressure? What does hydrostatic head pressure really mean? This isn't really going to get so intense and that we're going to get totally into the very molecules of how things are made, but it's good to know these things when you are making purchases. So, fabrics are made from yarns. That's not really that much of a revelation, right? But those yarns very often are either going to be natural or they're going to be man-made. Some examples of natural ones would be silk, which is an amazing fiber. Cotton, also, I mean, that clothed the world. The Kevlar is another one, and wool, which it is amazing that all that we put into things, there are properties of these fibers that we have not been able to match with our man-made fibers, but some of our man-made fibers do better in certain categories. Wool, particularly, is an amazing fiber for the way it sheds water and it keeps you warm even though it does get soaking wet. So, in the man-made fibers, there's nylon, there's polyester, Dyema is one. There's quite a few others, but those are some of the main ones that we're using in the outdoor industry. On the nylon, there is nylon 6 and there's nylon 6/6. Now, without getting into the science of that, know this: nylon 6/6 is stronger for its weight than nylon 6. It is more difficult to make, it's more expensive to manufacture, and that is why it's not in everything. But if you want to buy a better quality product that is stronger for the weight, look for the nylon 6/6 because it is stronger than nylon 6. So they take these fibers and they either weave them or they knit them. A cotton shirt would probably be a good example of a knit. And what I really want you to think about knits is they stretch. They are a bunch of little knots, just like a knitted sweater. And when you pull on it, those knots can contract and then spring back. And that is why it is very often used for clothing that you don't want to have, you want it to stretch. And if you do something like this, that it conforms to you. They also can put things in it like Lycra, which is basically an elastic. Think of that as an elastic. But cotton is very often worn for shirts. We don't use it much in the outdoor industry because 1, it rots. 2, it doesn't allow moisture to evaporate off of it. Now you may think that would be really good. And I've heard people say this, that I like to wear a cotton shirt because my shirt stays wet and that keeps me cool. But the only way that moisture, really the main way that it cools you, is that it's evaporating off of you. So if you are stopping that evaporation from happening, you are stopping the cooling. And that is why you want to have a wicking shirt and remove that moisture and have that moisture come off of you and go into the atmosphere. And then that is what winds up cooling you. So think of knitted as bug netting would be a very common thing that would be knitted. If you look at it under a microscope, it is a whole bunch of little knots that make that. It has a lot of stretch to it. Whereas a woven product, unless it has something that is really elastic, like Lycra, and this is very rare that it ever has that, it really doesn't stretch on the warp and weft. I'll explain later what that is, but basically that is the direction of the fabric. So this is, and you can tell because it has a ripstop on it, you can see that grid. This is a woven fiber. When you're trying to make something light, very often woven is lighter. If you're trying to make it waterproof, very often you want to use a woven fiber. And if I pull this, it basically has no stretch. If I pull on the same way this grid and these fibers are woven, You know, they are interwoven like this, and what you're doing is you're really just pulling the fibers like this. They don't really stretch, so it doesn't stretch. Now, to a certain degree, nylon does have a little bit of stretch, and you can see I'm able to move it a little bit, but not much. Now there's stretching it on the bias though. So if I wanted this to stretch and I turn this at a 45-degree angle, then you'll see that I get a much greater stretch. That's because those fibers totally have the ability to do this. And that is how you are able to get a woven fabric to have some stretch on it, is to cut it on the bias. One more piece to these fibers is there is bright and there's semi-dull. Now there's nuances of that, but basically that is going to be how smooth the fiber is. If it is bright, I want you to think of that as like fishing line. It is just a cylinder and it is nice and smooth, and it is going to make a fabric that is going to be silky, maybe plasticky is the end feel of it, and it's going to be very smooth. Versus, oh, here would be a fabric that would have a very dull or a semi-dull thread to it. I'm calling it thread. I should be using the term yarn because it's really yarn when it's used in a fabric. And this does not have a plasticky feel. This is a hexon. This is something that you lay on, and it's very intentional that this has a dull. What I mean by dull is I want you to think of a knitted yarn, that it's not just a tube. It is a tube with a whole bunch of little pieces that are coming off of it. Little tiny hairs that are microscopic. That is how hexon has its hand feel. So, and there are like semi-dulls, usually the term, but there's some that are full dull, so they just have more fibers to come off it. But really, the level that I'm really trying to get you to here is think about bright or dull. Then there is ripstop. So there can be some confusion as to what ripstop is, but ripstop was developed in the 40s, and it was developed for the parachutes that were being used. There was a little war going on at that time, so they wanted to make the parachutes to be lighter but yet stronger, and if a tear did start, they wanted it to stop, hence the name. So what they did, let's say they took a thinner fiber, and then every 10 fibers, maybe every 30 fibers, they put a much thicker fiber. And that way, if those thinner fibers tore, it would stop at that thicker fiber. So you can do this a couple ways. One is to use a thicker or stronger fiber. So a stronger fiber could be something like Dyema. Dyema is a stronger fiber, and it could be the same thickness as the nylon or the polyester, but when it hits that Dyema, which is a very strong fiber, it hopefully will stop. Another way of doing that is to cluster several fibers. Imagine you go and you put 3 strands into there, that way, and they are bunched up, and that way it hits that, and hopefully the rip stops and you don't die while you're dropping into enemy territory. For the thickness of fibers, the way they measure that is denier, and this is one that's really important. So to really give you relatability on this, a human hair on average is about 20 denier. That is the thickness of a 20 denier fiber. What really measures that is they take, and I don't know why they use this number, but they take 9,000 meters and they weigh it, and however many grams it is the denier. So if you have a 20 denier fiber, you take 9,000 meters of it, it will weigh 20 grams. The thinner the denier, the more strands you have to use. I want you to imagine 40 denier is going to use half as many strands to make a 60-inch wide fabric as a 20 denier. So you have a greater complexity because you have a greater number of threads that are going in to manufacture that fabric. And the thinner the fiber, generally, the weaker it is. So I want you to imagine this machine, and they got all these spools, might be 1,000 spools set up, and they are pulling all of these spools off and weaving this into a fabric. If it is super, super thin and one of those breaks in the process, then the machine has to be stopped and they have to fix it, or else you're going to have a line in the fabric which is weaker and may have a hole in it or something of that nature. So the reason that your ultralight fabrics and your ultralight gear is more expensive is because they had to have a much more difficult process in the number of strings that went into it and how easily those thin threads break. So I hope that really clears up and we have a greater understanding of what the denier is. Biggest thing to remember, 20 denier, human hair, and that's on average. Anything bigger than that, you're getting bigger than a human hair. Okay, tear strength. I'm going to show you at the very end a tear strength machine to test it. But tear strength, they go and they put a small hole into it, and then they see the resistance for that fabric to tear. So you are measuring how easily something, actually you are measuring the amount of resistance that a fabric will tear. Warp and weft. So where's my original fabric here? This one is very easy to see. And I want you to imagine that this is the width of the fabric and this is the length of the fabric. And it's coming off the machine like this. And this will be continuous. If I get a 200-yard roll, it'll be 200 yards this way. And if it's 60 inches wide, it'll be 60 inches this way. So warp is going to be the length of the fabric as it is manufactured. The weft is the left and right, or the width of the fabric. The way I think of that, left rhymes with weft. So you know that if someone's saying the tear strength, because there's tear strength that they measure on the warp and there's tear strength that they measure on the weft, or maybe they use a 20 denier on the warp and a 40 denier on the weft. You know that the weft means the width and the warp means the length of the fabric. So then there's something called a salvage, which salvage is at the edge of the fabric and it's how they convey it through the machine. And very often it is scrapped because there were little needles that had to move that. Sometimes when we make a hammock, we'll take that and we'll just put that into the rolled hem and you'll never see it. But in general, it is not a usable part of the fabric. And that is why when you purchase a fabric, they might say that it is 59 inches wide with 58 usable. That's 58 inside the salvages. Let's talk about DwR and some of the coatings that go onto fabrics and maybe some of the treatments. DwR stands for Durable Water Resistance. Now, that name makes you think that it's durable. Unfortunately, it's not all that durable. And washing it removes some of that, and it is a chemical treatment that they put onto it. Not too many years ago, a lot of it was done with something called C8, and it had a lot of fluorocarbons, that's really hard to say, fluorocarbons in it that were bad for the environment. And they did not leave the environment quickly, and they were turning up in the environment, the wildlife, and people. So everyone has moved away from this, and they've gone now more to C6, which does not stay in the environment and does not cause such potential problems with the getting into humans and also the wildlife. There has been a pretty big push for being more eco-friendly towards fabrics in the outdoor industry. Now, some of this is kind of fake because in order to say something is recycled, they're saying that it has really, it can have as low as 10% recycled content in it. And not very often is that post-consumer. When you take your water bottle and you throw it in the recycle bin, it goes out to the curb, it doesn't come back to you as a shirt. Very often they're using the recycled from their own manufacturing process. So there's a lot of places right now that are jumping on board saying, hey, we have this eco-friendly fabric, and it's a little bit deceptive. I really wish that there was truly, and there are some, do not think there aren't some. Some are 100% recycled fabrics. They really did take recycled post-consumer recycling, which is the most difficult to deal with. And they are turning into fabrics, and that is awesome. Just be careful that, because everybody gets to say that it's eco and it's recycled, and it may have just a very small percentage, and that percentage may be zero of post-consumer, and it's just their own manufacturing process where they take their trimmings and they grind it back up and they turn it into the same fabric. It is truly very difficult to make a quality fabric when you're getting very inconsistency from, your laundry bottle to your water bottle to your bottle cap. All right, so DwR, particularly if you wash it, will eventually come off. And there's a way to test it. You go and you spray it with water. And what you want to see is, does that water bead? And what I don't mean, is it just on the surface? I mean, is there like a bubble of water on here that it's not a hill, it's actually a bubble that comes up and is a complete circle. And when you shake it, does it all come off? If it's not doing that, then your DwR is fading. Now you can spray it down with a DwR, that will improve that. The number one reason for things breaking down is washing it, and it's really best not to wash your DwR fabrics. Wash it as little as possible is what I would say to keep that from happening. If you go and you put water on it and the fabric starts to darken, that is a real sure sign that your DwR is not working anymore, and that is called wetting out. Now, there are fabrics that are like Gore-Tex, and they are very often done with basically there's a membrane, and this membrane is made in such a way that vapor can pass through, but water droplets cannot. So when water lands on your sleeve, it will roll off, particularly because very often they put another fabric on top of that has a DwR. But the perspiration that you have turns into vapor, and that vapor can then go through those tiny pores. And that is a waterproof, breathable fabric. And they do have very impressive levels of this, but there's a caveat on this. Is there has to be a difference in the atmosphere that is positive to make this happen. If it is wetter on the outside of your jacket than it is on the inside of your jacket, it makes it very difficult for that water to go through there, that vapor to go through there and to leave. So preferably, if it is moist on the inside of your jacket and is dry on the outside of your jacket, and there is heat being generated, that is really going to make it so that this is going to be very breathable. But unfortunately, when we use these materials is very often when it is raining, and this is why these jackets wet out. I think that I am going to in the future move away from using these type of waterproof breathable fabrics because they're not great for the environment to manufacture these. Number one, they do tend to weigh more than your sills, such as your polysil, your nylon sil, and really don't work all that great. And sometimes they don't work that great for very long. So like I'm going on a thru hike next year, I'm probably going to have a sill jacket that's just going to be waterproof, and I'm just going to vent it. If you're like really out there and you're in the backwoods and you are in torrential rains, there's no such thing as waterproof. There's only dries fast. So keep that in mind. All right, so silicone coated fabrics. This is taking a silicone and basically saturating the entire fabric. And right here is a sil nylon. This is totally encased in silicone. And I want you to imagine you have that weave, and when you put silicone in it, it fills up all those little holes that are in between there. Now there's some things that you can do. You can weave this tighter, and that way those little holes that you have to fill are smaller. You can calendar it, which calendaring it is running over a hot roller, and that melts those fibers together a little bit more and makes those holes smaller. The smaller those holes are, the more difficult it is for water to get through. The easier it is for the silicone to prevent water from going through there. So if you want a very lightweight fabric, silicone is the way to go. It's not 100% silicone, and you would kind of think that it is. Unfortunately, 100% silicone is not all that durable. And what they do is they put a little bit of urethane into it, let's say 5% urethane, and that makes it so that it is more durable, and it will, you keep doing this to it, and it will keep its waterproof rating. The higher the urethane that's in that, the more it weighs. So urethane, very often to me, the way I think of that is it is a very thick substance, and so it is going to carry a little bit more weight. So sil nylon, sil polyester, they are fantastic fabrics for making tents. I think rain gear, tarps is just fantastic. The only downside to them is they're very difficult to repair in the field. And if you sew them, you're putting holes in them. You can bond now the silicone fabrics, but it is a difficult process. So one of the downsides there is it's very difficult to repair in the field. There's not many tapes and adhesives that will stick to it because, well, it's silicone. And then there is urethane. So urethane is not really saturating the fabric. It's more like a coating goes onto it. Generally goes on the inside of it, and very often this is on backpacks. One thing I think about urethanes is they break down after time, and unfortunately that coating peels off. And I don't think we totally have this perfected. We have made some gains in polyurethane coatings, but who hasn't seen an older backpack and you look on the inside and that coating is just peeling off because of all the times that it has been stretched. And I can only imagine that very difficult to make it so that the urethane coating will stretch with and then come back. You will get a very good waterproof rating on a urethane coating, but it's not long lasting. And I think the silicone is a better permanent solution for a waterproof rating. It used to be that 1,000 head pressure, and I'll explain what head pressure is in a little bit, but that used to be the standard, but nowadays they've kind of raised that, and they've raised the bar. 1,500 is very typical, and there are fabrics out there with a 5,000 millimeter head pressure. All right, so downproof. Have you ever heard anything being called downproof? What that is made so tiny fibers of down, which are practically microscopic, won't pass through the fabric. And if you've ever had something that isn't downproof, like a cheap jacket, and you're constantly pulling down out of it because they poke through. Very often when they do downproof, they have to do it in different fills, and some things are downproof, but they're not feather-proof because a feather will poke through it. But the way they do this is they run it over a hot roller. It's called calendaring, and it's generally done on the inside. It's why one side is shiny and the other side is dull on a lot of fabrics. But they are taking those fibers and they are melding them together, and they're making it so that the down cannot come through there. Air permeability is the amount of air that can come through here. And what I like to think about that is a good reason for air permeability is you want your sweat to pass through, and wind pants or a wind shirt, you would want a lot of air permeability. That is going to block the wind, but it's going to allow that fabric to breathe. And that really comes down to breathability. So on the hydrostatic head pressure, I'm going to show you a machine in a bit on how you measure that, but it's done in millimeters. And what they do is, let's say I have a column here, and that column, is 10 feet high, and they will fill it, sealed completely around here, and they will fill it with water. And they're saying that this will get to 1,500 millimeter before that water will wind up passing through. On our test, the way we measure it, we stick it on a machine and it comes down with a gasket and it sits there and it puts pressure underneath it. And then you watch the top and you see when you get, we want to see a total of 3 or 4 little droplets of water that form on the top, and then we say that is the head pressure for there. That is the point which it leaks. The thing is that in real life, you don't really have a column of water pushing down on your rain jacket, and it's really just landing and shedding off. And the higher the head pressure, certainly the better the waterproof rating on it is. Do you really need a 5,000 head pressure to prevent water? Think about what is that, a column of 5 meters high? It's going to hold back that much moisture. You really don't. Not in my opinion. And honestly, anything over 1,000 is, well, you didn't make it really any more waterproof. However, things do break down in time. So if you get something that's 1,000 now, in a year it might only be 500. So it's not bad to be going up around, 2,000 or something like that. All right, there's one more category of fabrics, and each of these could be a category on their own, but there are the laminates. So there are 3 real main companies that are really pushing the limits on strength and lightweight for backpacks, strength. And I want to give just a quick review on them. Each one of these could be a video on their own. I can tell you, these 3 companies, they are all competing to be the best, which is a good thing for you and I. And there's a certain amount of controversy over who is the best. And I think some of them are better in certain categories. But let's let them fight it out. But let's try to figure out what they are and how they're made. So I don't really think of a laminate very often as so much a fabric like is woven or knitted. Very often there is particularly a woven that's applied to it. But what really given a lot of their strength is they take basically a plastic sheet. Think of something like a mylar, and you take fabric and you sandwich it in there. You are going to hold all those fibers in place, and the fibers give it strength, while this membrane is going to make it so that it is waterproof, windproof, and also the fact that it is a laminate, it is like plywood, it is like reinforced concrete. They are enhancing each other. It is building a lot of strength. So the three main ones that I deal with and I think are really big in outdoor industry, we got Challenge Sailcloth, Dimension Polyant, which they're really known for, X-Pack, and of course we have Dyema, which is now been bought up by Avient. Let's start with Dyema. So these started as a sailcloth. They were found to be used in the outdoor industry, and it's really called Dyema composite fabrics. So Dyema is a fiber made by the company Dyema, which has been bought out, so I guess it's now made by Avient, but it's ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, and it is an extremely strong strand. It is 15 times the strength of steel compared to weight. And they take these tiny strands and they make a grid, and then they take laminates and they go on either side of it. This is a great example of that. This is a 0.51, and when you are seeing the different thicknesses or the different weights of Dyema, it's a variation of the amount of Dyema they put in here or the thickness of the laminate, and then sometimes they apply another fabric to the outside of that. Dyema is a fantastic outdoor fabric. It is going to cut your weight in half when you compare it to a lot of sil nylons and sil polys. It is crinkly. It doesn't pack down small. It's loud as a tarp if it's raining, but it is very repairable, which sil nylon is not that repairable on a tarp. It'll take any tape, and it takes it very well. Constructing it is fairly easy. Sewing it is beautiful because you can see that if I try to do a fold one here, or let's say a rolled hem, I mean, look at that, it folds like paper. And you can just run your sewing machine along that. And if you're adhering it, it takes the different Dyema tapes, it takes them literally like glue. It is glue, but it really bonds them really strong, and stronger than what the Dyema is. So they really excel, particularly in the very ultra lightweight fibers. And then we get into some where there can be one problem with this, is it's not abrasive resistance. So they started making some with a polyester, and like the 2.92, they give a very complicated code, such as this is CT5K.18 WOV.32C. I know the woven means it has this woven fabric on it, but basically that is this with then another coating put onto it, a polyester coating put onto it, so that it gets that wear resistance. You can see that with different very thicknesses, then it can go up to 100 denier that's on here. I think it may even go thicker, but that's why one side's rough and one side's really smooth. And now we've made a very strong fabric that is very waterproof, and also it is going to be resistance to, say you throw your pack down, it's going to be abrasive resistance. Dyema is a great fabric. They still have some really great applications. Someone that's been really coming on to them is Dimension Polyant, and they are producing their own laminates. One of their things that you'll see on them is this X that's on the back here, and that is a very strong, we're going to call that a ripstop, that is put into that laminate to make this really super strong. You can see it coming through on the front and the back. And I mean, here they're putting Dyema facing on it. They can put all these different faces on it. Some of them printed, some aren't. These are a very thick laminate. These are not ultra lightweight. Man, these things are strong. And if you are looking for strength in a backpack, Dimension Polygon's X-Pack is definitely one of my favorites. And Challenge sailcloth has been coming very strong on the market these days, and particularly their Ultra has been really widely used. You can see they're kind of using a combination of both. This is a Dyema fabric on the outside that is making it so it's abrasive resistance. I think they also put a polyethylene in here, so it's a combination of the two. And then they use a thick laminate, and kind of like X-Pack, only they go at a different angle. They put in this heavy duty ripstop that's in there. And these guys have made a name for themselves in the past couple of years. There is some debate as to who's really the best. And I don't really want to get in debate. I think most things, there's different applications for each. So, and you want to pick the right one for that. In the Ultra line, they are making different thicknesses, so the weight's real important to you. You go with like Ultra 200, strength's real important to you. You go to Ultra 400. All right, so one last thing I want to do to you is I want to show you some of the testing equipment that we use here to ensure that you have the right strength and the right waterproof rating. So let's take a quick look on that. So come along. So when we get a fabric in, if it is a waterproof, we're going to go and we're going to use this machine here. So this has a water tank on the bottom of it, and you put the fabric in there. You fill this pan up with water just by, you press a button and it fills this up. And then you bring this down and it's a clamp and it's going to seal it. So then it builds the pressure in there. It is trying to replicate that column of water that I told you about, but it goes and it measures the pressure, and then you watch it. And when you finally see 3 or 4 droplets coming through there, then you read the pressure and you know that that's what the head pressure is. And that way we can make sure that the coating was applied right at the manufacturing process. So another one is our tear strength. And on this one, basically we cut the fabric to meet this pattern, and then it puts a small tear on it. And when I do this, then I'm going to release it. It will take this and it'll pull it down, which will make this swing down, and it will tear the fabric. And what is measuring is the amount of resistance that it took to tear that fabric. And it is another way that we ensure that we're getting the same quality fabric every single time. So I hope that was at least a little bit informative as to how fabrics are made. Not for making your own fabrics. A lot of that you may already know if you are getting that deep into making your own products. But when we go out and we purchase products, what's the difference between a 20 denier, 7 denier fabric, and some of the coatings that are on it and things like that? So with that, thank you, everybody. Well, thanks for joining me on that adventure, and be sure to check out some other playlists. And of course, check out DwR&x for some of the greatest hiking gear on the planet. As always, thank you, everybody.